Cool. I guess, Michelle, let's start then. I can see there is a very good variety of like different marketing channels and what people are doing here. Definitely quite a few food related people here. So hopefully going to be relatable to what you do. And yes, so for today, our agenda would be for me to have a talk with Michelle and ask her questions. Questions will be around like product marketing and things like that for around 40 minutes. And then we'll leave 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, just put them in the chat and then I'll ask them or try to ask them throughout the webinar or at the end. Cool. So with that, I'll hand it over to Michelle. Here I've compiled a couple of photos from her tour to get you a little bit more excited about this. And yeah, maybe Michelle, you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about yourself.
Sure, cool. I have a real quick question. Shannon, you said you're in New Orleans, Shannon Balzer. Are you working for a food tour company in New Orleans? You can drop
No, I'm not actually. I work for Go City, which is an attraction pass company. But yeah, I'm based in New Orleans, so really excited to learn more about what you do.
Very cool. Yeah, I didn't want to give away any industry secrets in case I was like, who's spying? So I'm Michelle. I started the LLC for this tour company in 2016 on a whim. I was doing tours actually for locals, which if you are looking for something new to do and ease your way into this, I recommend it. I was basically selling tickets for one night a month on a weeknight that people would then buy the tickets, and it would include food at 3 or 4 places, including, it was more of like a neighborhood oriented tour where we had like, at one place we did a dance class, and one place we went to the Southern Food and Beverage Museum and the library where they keep all their cookbooks. And so I started doing these sort of neighborhood tours for people in New Orleans post Katrina, because we had lost a lot of neighborhoods in with Katrina that had been revitalized after the hurricane that people didn't know things were happening in. And so I kept seeing these really cool opportunities to take people out to places that were walkable from each other. And so that's how I started doing it for locals. And then I had 2 people from Mississippi, the next state over, come on my tour, and they were like, why don't you do this for tourists? And so that's how I decided to change my business model and my business plan to do my tours this way. So that's how I started. That was in 2016. It was pretty slow going at first. I have, like most people in New Orleans, several jobs. And probably most of you, if you are freelancers, you're in the same boat. And so this was kind of just a way that I could make a little money on the side doing something I loved, that I didn't have to put a lot of money into to operate. I'm really lucky that I didn't come from a place where I was already doing food tours, because I sat down and just was like, I planned it the way I was planning my tours for my locals, in that I just looked at some restaurants around my neighborhood, which is in the Garden District, which happens to be a very touristy driven neighborhood in New Orleans. And I thought of restaurants that I really liked. And then I went and looked at their menus, and I was like, what is shareable and how much does it cost? And so I put together a tour that included all the food, optionally could include all the alcohol, so a curated drink at each stop, and included 20% gratuity for my servers if it was table service, 10 to 15 if it was counter service, and then all the taxes. So I basically made myself a fake restaurant bill and at these 3 places, and then passed that on to my customer. Decided I wanted to make about 50%, and I just doubled that price. So if the food bill came out to $50 with all the tax and tip included, then I charge $100 for my tour. That said, then things like commission come up. Post-COVID, the price of food has gone up. So it's been a juggling act after COVID, and working through OTAs. So anyway, if you're thinking about what to do with your pricing, that's a good rule of measures. Like, how much do you want to make and how much is the tour going to cost you? I personally don't ask restaurants to cut me deals. I guess I could. I'm saving that favor for when I really need it. they already put up with a lot when I bring in 14 people in the middle of like a lunch service, but it's a lot of relationship building. It's a lot of like, the places I bring people is because they treat me like they're happy to have me there. They treat my guests with respect, and we work together. For example, if I bring somebody in at noon and it really screws up their lunch service, so they ask me, can you bring them in at 11? And I make that change. I figure out how we can work with each other. So I like it because it's a really collaborative business. I've been doing it for a few years now. Post-COVID, it's been super busy. It's my max tour size is 14, which is another important thing to think about for yourself, is like, how many people can you successfully manage that people won't feel neglected and your venues won't feel like you're just hitting them with more than 14 people. 14 people is kind of the max of like a restaurant's capacity for dealing with you. So sorry, that was a lot of information, but and pretty all over the place. But I hope that's a good introduction to some of the challenges and like how I started doing what I do. So yeah.
Cool. No, that's very exciting. And actually, a good segue to this would be something is when I talked to you for the first time, you mentioned this, you said, you know, that you designed the tour as if you had designed it for yourself as a traveler or as a customer. And, you know, your customer reviews on different platforms, this is your customer review from GetYourGuide, and this one is from Airbnb, are really very, very high. And I was interested to ask you about, was it like this from the first go? Like the first tour you launched was great and, you know, 5-star rating basically, and people were happy, or you kind of iterated on it over time? And how did you do that?
So I have a big personality and able to just talk to anybody. That's from my dad. That's from being a Southerner. So if you have the gift of gab, that's a big bonus. I think the main thing that carried me through in the early days was being able to, there's a saying in this restaurant industry that like the kitchen can be on fire, but as long as the dining room doesn't know, you're doing a good job. So even though things were a little chaotic in the beginning, as long as you can cover that up, you're going to get good reviews. So I got good reviews right away, but that was because I come from an event and service background that like, I knew how to, if things weren't right, and I could get the vibe that people were like, where's the rest of our food? I could make that happen. It's also part of like working for myself. If you don't have somebody over you that's telling you what you can and can't do, then you can meet those expectations as they arise. So people in the early days, I wasn't sure if I fed them enough. I wasn't sure, you know, like if they were hungry by the time I was finished talking in the first part of my tour. So I talked during my tour for about almost an hour. Our tour starts at 10 a.m. The first restaurant opens at 11. So I have included into my notes now, be sure you eat breakfast. So if they show up without eating breakfast, that's on them. But in the early days, that was something I had to learn, is that people were like starving because they thought they were going to get fed right away. So I ended up with good reviews in the very beginning, but I think a lot of it was me like hiding the chaos that might have been going on in the early days of doing this, because I didn't entirely know what I was doing right away, and things came up. Things are always going to come up. The other part of it, and this happened this weekend, which I'll probably talk about a little later, is like things don't always go to plan. But if you're honest with your guests and you're like, I'm doing the best I can, and you just really try to carry it along with you as much as you can, they see that you're struggling and they know that things are out of your control sometimes. And honesty has been really good policy, which I didn't act, is that sometimes silence things happen, power goes out, somebody had like gas leak this Sunday, that the kitchen caught on fire. I was like, as long as they were fed and I make the emphasis to that, like the food isn't just the focus of this tour, and you're getting a local's view into my neighborhood. Sorry. So part of that is like making it beyond the food. So I think my personality probably was able to get me good reviews really early on. I had a few that were bad, but not really anything. Like I've been super lucky. I've had, and I think that's the platform too, is like, who is booking your tours and where are you doing your tours? If I did my tours in the Fridge Quarter, I would probably have a lot more poor reviews because that's a certain kind of tourist. that has high expectations. So mine were good early on, but that doesn't mean that if you have ones that are not good early on, that you're doing a bad job. You just have to figure out how to flow to go with the flow sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And how did you understand like these things that you described, such as, for example, if the person came hungry to the tour, like, did they tell you straight direct, or did you kind of ask them somehow? Do you have any tips for people around here? Like, how can they understand more what their customer actually wants?
Yeah, like their body language and their nonverbal cues. Also a good way to not get bad reviews is to ask them for feedback. Tell them that you're starting out. And so you can ask them like, how was it, you know, they can tell you then in person, they're not going to write you a bad review because they feel like they've been heard. So if you're just starting out, that's a good way. But my nonverbal cues, I mean, people would be like, you know, people would kind of look like they were fading when I was talking to them. They kind of looked like they were fading out. Now it's New Orleans, people drink a lot the night before. So sometimes people are just hungover. But you know, you can kind of tell when people are hungry and impatient. There's a lot of shifting in their body language. There's a lot of like distant looks. They zone out when you're trying to tell them history. For me, it was really important that I incorporated the history of the neighborhood. So I changed to say like, you guys have to eat before you come, or else like, I don't want to hear it. Like you're going to be talked to for almost an hour about like architecture and history. And I make it as entertaining as possible, but like, you know, you kind of start seeing people's body language. They, when they're hungry, they fade a little bit. As far as like how much food somebody got, if there was food still on the table, if you had like food still on the table, people, you have to see if people are being polite and not eating the last bite of something, or if they're like satiated enough with food. So that's just something you have to like kind of check in. I make the joke like, hey, this is your permission to finish the plate. Like if everybody's had some, anybody wants some seconds, like I'm that like permission person to finish eating the last bite of something when you're in a shared space at a table. And then other than that, people get their own piece of food. So after the first one, I don't really have a gauge, but I've noticed as I've done tours, people saying they're full. By the time they get to the last place, some of them split food. Some of them are like, oh, can I take this with me? So that's how I know I'm feeding people enough. Now there's always going to be one or two people who probably like could eat the whole city and you can't satiate them. And then there's always going to be like the garbage disposal person that's like happy to eat whatever's left over in front of them, and they're great. But yeah, I had a really interesting review the other day. The only bad review I've had lately was through, I think it was Cozy Meal, and the guy asked for a refund because he said he didn't get enough food, but like he showed up late and he's a vegetarian. So I gave him as much food as possible. But there's just, I supplemented as much as possible, but I told him like, I don't get that complaint a lot, so I'm not refunding this person. Like,
yeah,
sorry.
makes sense. And maybe as a hint for me, like when you see people fading out, any tips on like what you do then? Are you kind of rushing them to a restaurant?
I kind of, if it's one person fading out, then and out of a group, it's kind of like on them. But if I start seeing people like shift and stare in his face, I keep going with my internalized script. I don't really have a script. I have points that I hit on at this point. It's almost recitation because I've done this tour so much. But you know, if it seems like the group's like really not interested in the history that I'm going through, I might just like cut it short and just start walking with them instead. But I pretty much just like have learned that I go through my tips and or my script, for lack of a better word. And some people are going to be interested in architecture, and some people are going to be interested in the part about civil rights, and some people are going to be interested in the part about like early colonization and how it's different in New Orleans than it is other places. Some people are just interested in the cemetery. So we've all sat through an hour or something we didn't want to hear. Some of you probably are doing it right now, but you know, you just go with the flow. But I feel like an hour of information is more than enough to lay on to people. I tell them, I throw the kitchen sink at them, and if they can remember what the faucet looks like, then I've done my job.
Cool. Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you very much for sharing that. I guess for the sake of time, let's move on from the product side and talk a little bit about the marketing and how you found your customers, how you distributed your tour to the customers. So here I've picked some, general graph on like your growth of bookings at Get Your Guide with us, and it was pretty significant growth since 2020. And yeah, I wanted to ask you first on like, where did you get your first customers from, such as travelers, I would say, the ones that you mentioned, like, tourists, and then how did you grow from then?
Yeah, so the pathway that I went on was I built my website. So I went to school for graphic design, so I could build my website pretty easily. And honestly, there's enough tools out there now that almost any of you on this call can build your own website. And I highly recommend it because you have control over your own website that way. And you can ask people for feedback on how it looks and the amount of information and all that. But having control over your own website is really important, so you can change things that don't work for you. So I built my website. I had Peak first. I switched from Peak to Fair Harbor. If anybody doesn't know what those are the ticketing, the online platform that hosts ticketing. So you don't have to build a ticketing platform. They sell tickets for you. They don't do advertising and things like that, but they provide the thing that you book tickets through. And then Airbnb experiences came to New Orleans. They advertised that they were coming a year before they actually came. And when they finally did come, I was one of the first providers on Airbnb experience. And then I got a lot of bookings through that, but they take 20%. So I really like it when I get bookings through my website, because then I get to keep all that money. But I consider it in the fee of the commission fee through Get Your Guide, the cost of doing business, to not have to pay for marketing and advertising. I saw a few people in the chat, they have really good luck with Google Ads. Google Ads, if you can afford it, is great. If you can say, I had an analysis done by Google, and they'll do that for you for free. I had an analysis through Google Ads done, and it would take me about $1,200 a month to get my money back, to like really make an impact on my customer base. I don't have $1,200 a month to throw at advertising. So I prefer just using the commission. So my early days were just people finding me through people who did deep digs into Google. And then a lot through Airbnb. And now that's pretty much who I get my bookings through, is Get Your Guide and Airbnb. Get Your Guide is really cool because they use the platform I already have on my website for the calendar. Airbnb has its own app. So in other words, if tomorrow I'm only going to have 14 people max, if 2 people book, if I am at 12 people right now and 2 more people book tonight, I have to make sure that my tour is closed everywhere so that 2 more people don't book somewhere, or like 8 people don't turn around and book tomorrow. So the more like balls you have to juggle, the more things can fall through the cracks. So just like try to streamline as much as possible, which is why I actually really like Get Your Guide, because their calendar is the calendar on my website. So I have to keep up with one calendar. Yeah, Nikita put my my website on the chat if anybody wants to read about the tours I offer. It was a lot of trial and error to have the 2 tours that I have, the 3 tours that I have now, which if y'all want to talk about it, we can talk about it. But as I am still using Fair Harbor and actually really like Fair Harbor. I did not like Peak. Also, Fair Harbor, if anybody's on it and uses it, they have something called the Distribution Network that I highly encourage you to get in on. It's basically tours telling or advertising other Fair Harbor tours, people who use Fair Harbor in their business, on their website. So on my website, I have a bike tour that I can sell. I have a ghost tour, et cetera, et cetera. I just put those people on my website, has like other things to do. Follow this link. They follow that link and they book. I get a little bit of money. They get a little bit of money. So it's kind of scratch your back. We have all different tours. I don't advertise food tours, of course, but I love sending people to places that are small local businesses and not huge tour companies. So that's a good opportunity through them. I really like that.
Cool. And in terms of sequencing of all of that, of all of those channels, like you mentioned the Airbnb, you mentioned Get Your Guide, and you mentioned also the connectivity platform, the way we call it, like Fair Harbor. like for those people just starting out here on the call, what would you recommend starting with? And at which point should it be this booking management system like FareHarbor and then going to OTA platforms, or I don't know.
Like, what's
Yeah.
the order of that?
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
recommend anybody who's starting their own business and doesn't already work for a company that has a website, build your own website first, because that's your identity. That's going to be your photos, your description, exactly what you want to say about your tour, your pricing. It's going to be like, if everything else went away, that's the meat and potatoes of your business. And then as soon as you have it built and you're happy with it, now they do advise, this is a good advice that Airbnb had that I didn't have to do because I had those big groups already, but they do say, like, sell to your friends, sell to, invite people you know on tours for like just the cost of the food. So if it's $50 for the food, instead of me making another $50, I'm just like, hey, do you guys, can I take you out to eat? You know, just pay for the food. I'll take care of your drink. Even if you don't have the money to do that, just say, just if you can pay for your food, I'll take you around. I'll give you, I'll test my tour out on you. I'll take some photos, and then I'll use those photos to make my website so that you have content and you have reviews. And have them go on Google and write reviews for you. So friends, family, associates, coworkers, strangers on on Facebook, whatever. Try to build your customer base that way so you have the at least something to start with. But yeah, I would do website, and then as soon as that was ready, I would start selling it on Airbnb, because the less reviews you have, the lower you appear. But as you start building reviews, you start appearing higher. And then Get Your Guide has certain standards that you have to meet to make sure you're listed on there. So my most successful platforms have been Get Your Guide and Airbnb and my website. There's also Cozy Meal, and there's also Eat With. They're not as successful. People don't use them as much. But yeah. Sorry, there was a question. No, I do not ever get complaints about FareHarbor adding a service fee for customers, because that's a credit card fee, and they know that.
And maybe a question regarding those tests, like some people in the chat also mentioned they tried Google ads. Some people mentioned Facebook ads. And you didn't try them, or tried them differently maybe. So how did you understand or make a conclusion for yourself? Like, hey, this doesn't work for me. Like Google ads doesn't work for me, but Airbnb works out for me, for example. How did you decide?
Yeah, Google ads made it really easy when he was like, this is how much it's going to cost for you to have any real impact on your business. And I was like, I can't afford that. So I think my max spend is $50 a month on Google ads. And the way that it works is that you don't get charged unless somebody clicks on it. So you are only paying for its use, which is good, but you tell them how much money you can afford to spend. If you can afford a $200 spend on some ads, try it out for a month or two and see if your ads go up. Now, just keep in mind, this is a feast or famine tourist seasonal operation. So your bookings might have gone up just because it's a good month for spring break. I might not have had anything to do with those ads. So that's where it gets like murky. So I didn't really feel like investing the money ahead of time yet, maybe one day. So that's how I knew Google ads wasn't for me. Facebook ads, I never really looked into, just because I'm not a huge Facebook user. And I feel like it's probably, I don't know. I'm sure other people have success with the Facebook ads, but I haven't really gotten into it. And then I did forget to mention my early days, and I'm sure people have feelings about this if they've been in the business before for a minute. TripAdvisor/Viator did not work for me. The only negative reviews I got were from people on TripAdvisor and Viator. I have a feeling that it's just you want to hit your target audience of people that will appreciate what you do. And so my tours are very like having a conversation with me. It's all like very local experience in the neighborhood. It's not wham bam, this is New Orleans, this is the epitome of New Orleans food. You're eating gumbo, you're eating jambalaya, you're eating bread pudding. Like, they're gonna eat po' boys in a dive bar, but you're gonna see my neighborhood. So I want to find that customer, and I wasn't finding them on TripAdvisor. So I feel like the best advice is just like try a lot of stuff and see what doesn't stick and doesn't work for you. Viator made it really easy because they raised their percentage. And then they tried doing this thing where they took more money so that you would appear higher on the ranking. So instead of merit base, it was how much money you wanted to give them. And I thought that was really bogus. So I took myself out of the game with them. I'm still on there, but I never sell tours through it because I'm probably on page like 82.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and I think this is a great piece of advice of like focusing on your target customer and who your target customer is and where this target customer lives and which channels and platforms. I think this is something we as marketeers love to talk about a lot on like marketing for brands and things like that. And this is great to hear that this is also applicable to like you are running a tour and trying to find your niche customer who is willing to go and try your tour out.
Yeah, it took me like 3 years to realize that my customer is not my customer is not your average visitor to New Orleans that's interested in the French Quarter. That my customer, because it's outside the French Quarter, which for anybody doesn't know, French Quarter is a very touristy part of New Orleans, but it's only like a square mile of the city. It's a very old part of the city, but it's become very commercialized. And it's like, if you like big group tours of 30 people, that's the place for you. But if you want to go walk through a place and see how people live the place you're visiting, maybe you've been to New Orleans before and you want to see a different side of New Orleans, like that turns out to be the person that's booking my tour. And it took me a while to realize who that person was. So it might not be obvious right away who your person is, like who your customer is, but it'll become obvious.
Yeah. And I think that's a great segue also to the question, or to one question on the chat, which is about differentiating yourself from competition. How do you make sure that, you know, people, when they stumble upon your tour, they understand that this is somehow different from any other tour out there in New Orleans?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I devised it for myself. And I like to travel like that. Like, I don't like doing touristy stuff when I travel, which is probably why I hadn't done food tours, because I always pictured them being like me and a bunch of other people who weren't from there, you know, walking around in a city, you know, learning from very specific information from a tour guide. Like growing up in New Orleans, I had a really poor opinion of tour guides because you would always see them in the French Quarter being theatrical and making stuff up, and they weren't for us. They weren't for locals. And so I made the tour that I would want to have as a traveler for my specific kind of like travel style. And because of that, I have a lot of fun. And I always have like, I never, even if I wake up and I don't feel like doing my tour that day, by the end of my tour, I'm like, those people were so nice. Like I always end up talking to them and learning about like where they are. If you get sick of your part of your job of like talking about New Orleans all the time, ask them about themselves, because people love talking about themselves. And you learn a little bit, they'll have a great time. You can somehow sometimes incorporate that into your conversation about New Orleans. You know, I started doing food tours because I thought that was a good way for people to learn history, because it's tangible. Like everybody eats. So there's history, there's this sort of unspoken history that lives in food that makes for really interesting stories that people can connect to, that you can always learn more about, even if it's not the food they're eating. I like to talk about the history of cocktails a lot. And a lot of the cocktails, we don't serve those at the tour, but while they're here, they should try a Sazerac, they should try a Hurricane. And it just became like something I wanted to read about. And so I built the tour that like interests me as much as it interests them. Like now all of my books this last Christmas were all like books about history and New Orleans history and food history. The other part of it is, and some of you won't have this choice because you work for other companies, but if you are building your own tour company and you have maybe another job or you have other obligations, decide how many tours you want to do a day, because when you do more than one a day, it starts getting really hard on your energy levels. Like it sucks your energy out of you, even if you're an extrovert. Let's see, what was I going to say? I try to do just one tour a day. And then if somebody wants a private tour, I might do a second tour. So that's what happened this Sunday, is somebody overbooked a tour. By some fault of my own, I left a platform open with 9 extra spots, and it would have been like 22 people on my tour. So I just gave them a private tour. And because it was later in the day, and whatever, they had a brewery by my house that was serving crawfish. So they got all this like cool bonus stuff for being like a private tour. But I generally will only do 1 tour a day. Here, I'll put my favorite books in the chat while Nikita moves on.
Oh, great. Maybe let's now move on to talk a little bit about the OTAs as a source of customers. How I think you've mentioned a little bit already, like on when would you test an OTA and that kind of stuff. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about like the highlights of working with OTAs for you and the downsides as well. What would those be?
Yeah, I mean, the downside, big obvious one, is the commission. I mean, 20 to 25% of your income. Like, first of all, customers don't realize that people take that much money from you. So you have to be careful about how much you're providing them. You want to make sure they're eating enough, getting enough value for their dollar, because in their mind, they've paid the full amount. Even in your pocket is only what's going in is 20% less than what they think. So that's a balancing act. You know, some days I make 50%, some days I make 35%. Some days that it should just even out along the way. Definitely keep yourself like a ledger, keep yourself notes. My spreadsheet just says the date of the tour, how much I spent at each place, the grand total of that, how much money I made. I subtract those two, and I know how much, not how much money I made, the grand total of how much I spent, the amount of tickets that were sold, and then with the commission taken out, and then those two just subtract it to see how much money I made that day. And then I like to do a percentage just so I know where I'm at, to make the figure a little more like understandable in my brain. So I strive for about 50%. And if I look and I start seeing things ticking off, then I have to go back and fix it. So a good example is the bar crawl. Before COVID, drinks on Frenchman Street were like $8 a pop. Now they're 15. So I had to change my bar crawl to not include more than, it used to be 4 drinks. Now it's like 1. So you have to keep an eye on your income and all of that. Just keep a tight eye on it, because you don't want to be siphoning money for something that doesn't work and be working for free. Back to the question, sorry. What are the highlights of working at the OTAs? OTAs sell your product for you to a customer that is very specific. So unless you have direct marketing and the ability to afford direct marketing, OTAs market for you for 20 to 25% of your ticket. And that 25% can be passed on to the customer. What are the downsides of working with OTAs for you? That was kind of, how did you decide whether to test with an OTA? That was a no-brainer for me, because I don't sell that much through my website because I'm not paying for Google Ads. So, you know, there's people who would argue that if I took that money out of my pocket in advance and I put it towards Google Ads, maybe I would sell more on my website. Sure. Do I have that money in advance to take out of my pocket and put towards Google Ads? Not right now, maybe next year. Maybe I have to rethink of like, you know, how much I'm willing to put into my business. Is it a side hustle or is it a business? Is it a job? So it just is what's right for you. You have to decide where you are in the traversing the terrain. But yeah, I still think even if I was successful through just my website, I would still sell through GetYourGuide and Airbnb. They would just fill up faster. I would make less tickets available through them. So I would sell 10 tickets on my website where I get to keep all the money. And then I could sell 4 tickets on GetYourGuide for that tour, and maybe 4 on Airbnb. So I don't know, I hope that gave you guys some ideas.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there is also a related question there around like content that you're creating to drive sales, like YouTube channel or Instagram Reels, something like that.
Yeah. So Sandy, I just had this conversation with another person at a different job about content creation. And here's where I am. I'm 43. And so it took me a while to understand a lot. I grew up with social media, but not the way it is now. And so it took me a while to understand like I'm still not understanding how to find those gaps. So the problem I'm having right now, and I have to take workshops on this to figure it out, is how to get the content that I create to the people that I want to see it. Like, Like if I sit around and make a ton of content, that's great. I spent a bunch of time making content and I'm like, had a good time with it. But then like, how do I get the most bang out of my buck? Like, how do I get the biggest return on my investment of time making that content? And so this is like a new conversation for me. So I don't have a good solution for that, because I can have a YouTube channel, but if nobody's looking at it, what's the point? So I am about to embark on that journey and figure out how I can get my content out into, because I feel like it would be really fun to make this content. But I just don't want to do it for fun. I don't have the time to. Somebody, let me just see something really quick.
Yeah, I think while you're looking through the other questions as well, I can also say that from talking to different tour owners from our side, from GetYourGuide, we constantly keep hearing that the OTAs give the value of like, you don't have to do much, like you just put the tour there and then you start getting the traction, the sales, and that's kind of people treat it as a marketing channel, which has a fixed income, so you don't have to fixed costs, sorry. So you don't have to actually invest a lot of time in that. While Google ads or Facebook ads are channels where I think you have to invest a little bit more time on your own on to see how the tracking works and how to push the ad spend and to make sure that you spend everything correctly and track all of that stuff every day, which sometimes takes time from people looking into how to improve their tours and how to make their tours better for the customers. So yeah, I just wanted to share on top of this feedback. And yeah, back to you.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, and it has to tickle that part of your brain that you want to sit down and do it. It's the same thing with like website design. Some people just look at the idea of designing their own website and they're like, absolutely not. But I have a feeling it's one of those things, once you sit down and you start learning about it, that it's not a huge mystery. There's enough resources out there that like we can get to figure it out together. But yeah, it is a lot of work and it's not fun. Yeah. I mean, I don't know anybody that loves analyzing Google Analytics sheets, but
oh, I love it, but that's why I don't run a tour.
Great. Would you like to do that for me? Okay. So I had somebody ask, my profit margin is 50%. Just to give you an idea of, here, I'll just talk math. I charge $95 a tour. That is what GetYourGuide charges. GetYourGuide then takes that 25%. So now I'm left with $76. Then of that $76, I have about half of that to use on food and drinks. When people share food, it can go a long way. When you talk to your restaurants and you say, hey, how much is a well drink? Is it $5? Then that can go a long way. So yeah, just to do the math, I take $95, I subtract that 25%, that leaves me with 70. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm thinking an Airbnb is 20%, that's $76, a little bit more. And then about half of that goes to the food. When somebody takes 25%, like GetYourGuide instead of Airbnb's 20%, a little bit more comes out of your pocket, but you're also selling through Airbnb and you're also selling on your website. So sometimes it evens out, but yeah, that's kind of, I'd like to keep my price below $100 because I feel like $100 is now mentally something different for people. So I keep it below the 100 on purpose. And then I just will adjust my food menu as required. And sometimes that means that a place I really like that sells seafood and oysters and really nice drinks, if they can't do me a drink deal anymore, or the oysters have gotten really expensive, we have to just stop going there. There's other restaurants in the neighborhood that I go to instead then. So it's a tightrope act. Just seeing if anything else. That's SEO. Yes, SEO. I did a deep dive into SEO for my website. SEO, for anybody that doesn't know, is search engine optimization for your website. It's to make sure your website is being seen as much as possible. There are people that will do that will analyze it for you and tell you the flaws in your SEO. I lucked out because during COVID, somebody in my neighborhood was donating their time without selling packages to look at your website, and 72 and your costs are half of that. Yes, that is correct, Brian.
And I think there was also one question that we missed, which is, how did you get the restaurants to agree to your business model? Are there any hints there?
Yeah, Oh, one more thing, Brian. So that half point, just know that when I give tours for 2 people, I don't make a lot of money that day when I only have 2 people book my tour. But if I have 14 people book my tour, or even 8 people book my tour, I make a lot more money that day. So you have to kind of look at it like that too, is like, the more you, there's going to be really good days. So the way that I got restaurants so the first thing I did was decide the restaurants I wanted to use. And some of them have closed, some of them have gone out of business, some of them, like I said, they got too expensive. But I went in and I just on a downtime in the restaurant, which is usually like a weekday between lunch and dinner, talked to the manager and said, this is what I want to do. You know, what are you guys comfortable? Like, what's your max table capacity? Can I do a 12 top without any problem? Some restaurants are really small and only want 12 people max. Some restaurants are really, really big and don't care if you bring in, 14, 15, 16 people, but I am not comfortable hosting 18 people. Like, it's too chaotic. I lose them. I'm just there. I'm a warm body that's taking them restaurant to restaurant. So my quality, I found maxes out at 14 people. And most restaurants can live with that. And then I make reservation. The ones that take reservations, I make reservations. I just say, here's what I got coming up. Can you book me this table for 8? And like you talk about to them about like, what is their lunch rush? When are you most annoying to be in there? Like, you want to avoid being annoying. So you have to kind of put yourself in their shoes, and I learned not just in the owner's shoes, because everybody says, oh, I'm sure the owners love you. Well, yeah, the owners love me, but the owners are never the ones that are there working their ass off to feed my people. The service people are the ones that, the front of house is the ones that are there. The kitchens are the ones that are. So I want to make sure that those people, like, I'm making it as possible for them. Because at the end of the day, that's what they get a bigger tip. But I mean, they're just working just as hard as they would if 14 people who weren't related to me came in. So, so that's how I got the restaurants. And then some restaurants I stopped using because like I just didn't like how they were treating, like they made me feel like a burden. And you should never feel like a burden. You're bringing them business, as long as you're being like what do you call, like, considerate of them, then they should be happy to have you there. So the places I have now are excellent. Like, they have hard days. We get in fights sometimes. Sunday was a perfect example of one of those. But for the most part, like, I'm treated well. The customers in turn are treated well. Another weird little tip, while I'm thinking of it, is I pay away from the table. I never have, I made sure all my restaurants that serve, or my servers, know not to put the bill on the table because it feels really awkward to everybody. I just, as soon as they're eating, like when they seem to be wrapping up and I want to get us out of there pretty fast, I go over to the counter and I pay right then and there without them bringing the bill. And so they know that. And it's just a weird trick that I learned. I get angry if we don't order a full plate, then you don't work with those places. You have to tell people that, like, this is my business, you're in business too, and as important as their restaurant business is to them, your business is important to you. So they have to be willing to accommodate the fact that you're going to be eating at 3 places. And so this is an appetizer stop. Now, I don't give people little bites. I give people, like, first stop, they get, I call it the appetizer stop. They get a serving of red beans and rice. That's about a cup of food. And then a piece of fried food. That's another little separate dish. So if you have like a salad plate, it's about the size of a salad plate. And then the second stop is a beignet stop, where they get a beignet and a coffee. And then the last stop, which, I'm sorry if anybody doesn't know what a beignet is, they're about that big and it's fried dough. And then the last stop, I'll either do a half of a po' boy, which is a sandwich that's about that big. So that's about 5 or 6 inches. And then, or I'll do a whole sausage. So I have one thing that is like a substantial meal, and the other 2 things are snacky. But I don't want to fill them up on bites because I feel like that's really petty and it feels very cheap.
Cool.
Angry.
I'm happy that I had dinner before this talk.
It was good. I get sick of the food.
Maybe as we're running out of time a little bit, there are some questions here. Maybe though, I think we should start wrapping this up. I'd love to ask you on the question on the future of travel, and like, how do you expect yourself adapting or changing anything in the future forward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. It's been really great after COVID, as soon as we didn't have to talk about vaccines anymore, because I don't need to know people's medical history, and it got really crazy and political and weird. And so now it's like back to kind of normal. And the future for might involve hiring one other person to work when I want to be out of town, because I also work festivals and I also like to travel. And so I feel really bad when I am like in the middle of spring and I'm working a festival that's I really enjoy, that I have to say I'm not available because I don't know how much money I could be making if I didn't work this festival, but I really like working festivals. So I might hire somebody that just to do those like occasional events. And then that might be the next phase of my growth. And then I think content creation is going to be a big thing for me. I want to work smart and not hard, getting old. So I would very much like to take my passion for like food history and my culture in New Orleans and share it with more people that can't necessarily travel or can't afford to come on a food tour, or just like I'm not available for. So that's my future in my adapting. As far as travel, I mean, everybody Instagrams everything. So a lot of visual travel seems to be personal experiences. I think people are really looking for like a local's view of a place they are visiting. I think that's like the way that younger people are traveling. That's different than boomers of the year. Oh, sorry, I just left somebody a really long voicemail. I think that the younger generation is more interested in like locals. Please leave your message for 8. Sorry. Really quick, because I can answer these questions super quick. I order my food at my first restaurant. I order my food ahead of time. I call them. I make my reservation in advance, but then I call them about 10 minutes before they open and give them the food order. I order the same things every time, just in different quantities, so they are used to me. They do not keep my credit card on file, and most places actually take cash now without charging a credit card fee. And choosing his own food. So this is a weird little thing that I do that I think other food tours don't do. They choose the kind of beignet they want, because there's several flavors of not just the traditional beignet, but they actually do filled beignets. So they get to choose those. And they choose the kind of po' boy they want or the kind of sausage they want. And so they actually, the first stop I tell them I drive, and then the other 2 stops I tell them they get to make choices if they want to. And then I just give them suggestions if they don't. So yeah, I hope that answers the questions that were, because we might not have time for Q&A. So I just wanted to get to stuff as we could.
Cool. Yeah, no, I think that goes through all the questions that we had on the chat. Maybe I'll leave it to one more last question if somebody wants to ask something before we go, and then we can wrap it up. I can see actually one question coming about the allergies. Yes, and it was already mentioned before.
So as far as food allergies, I can accommodate most allergies in vegetarians. I cannot accommodate vegans. And I have learned that kind of the hard way. Vegans, I was like running around with my like a chicken with my head cut off, trying to accommodate them. And I was just like, it's not worth it. Vegetarians, I work with, New Orleans is not known for its vegetarian options at a lot of places. We do have vegetarian food, but it's, you know, so the vegetarian options I worked out with each spot. The sausage place, for example, if I have a vegetarian or somebody that's gluten intolerant, I don't use the dive bar, because nothing on that menu is gluten-free, and they don't have a lot of good vegetarian options. So then we have a backup plan where I go to the sausage place. So they have like alligator sausage. They're vegetarian. They actually have vegetarian sausages. They don't have to have a bun. So yeah, those are mostly easy to accommodate, more than you would think in New Orleans. Like, you would come to New Orleans, who would have a seafood allergy and come to New Orleans, but people do, and they're not that hard to accommodate, but you have to like plan it. You have to have a plan in advance. But once you've done it once, you know it, you've got it. I actually don't have liability insurance this year.
Then I guess let's wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Michelle, for spending your time on talking to us. And I hope, thank you everyone also for joining the webinar. And I hope that it was useful. I'm glad that there were questions and they got answered. So yeah, let's.
I'm just gonna put my email address if you have.
Yeah.
NOLA.com. If you guys are embarking on your food tour journey and have questions or whatever, that's my email. And then, yeah, so if anything I didn't get to in the Q&A that you're like dying to know, just hit me up by email. I just would love more people in the world spreading history knowledge through tangible, fun things like food, and getting people to love your city a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. And if you're fine, I'll be sharing also the recording afterward with everyone attended and non-attended. Happy to share your email there as well, so the folks can reach out to you and ask questions if they have any.
Awesome. Thanks, Nikita, for setting this up. This was really great.
Sure. Thank you, guys. Have a good rest of the day then.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye, Nikita. Talk to you soon.